Good morning. Hope that's working. Good morning. Thank you for joining me. It's a beautiful, well, actually, I haven't been outside, so that's a lie. It looks like it's an okay Sunday morning, February the 13th. As always, thank you so much for taking some time out of your morning to join me. I'm sure a few more people will start to trickle in, but there's no reason why you should be punished for being on time. I've actually got something I think is very interesting to talk to you about today. Hopefully you'll agree. I have a property. I have a relist. So at least for me, relists are always very, very interesting, right? What I mean by a relist is a property that was listed for sale maybe a year or two ago that I had looked at and analyzed and maybe even thought about making an offer on, but for whatever reason did not. And now it's come back around onto the market. So we get to see what some other investor, buyer, person who made a mistake and lost a bunch of money did, right? And kind of compare the numbers that we had for that property, our projections, right? We can now go back and compare what we had projected for that property and see what some intrepid investor out there actually did with it. So those opportunities do come up once in a while when you're watching the market closely, and I think it's always fascinating because it's an opportunity to both calibrate your own analysis, right? It's a chance for me to look at what I did in the past and compare that to how things played out in reality, right? And that's obviously very beneficial for me or for anybody who's an investor who's watching, right? Because you now have that increased market insight and increased market knowledge, right? Obviously, it's also very, very cool because sometimes, I don't want to put this. Well, with real estate investing, obviously, there's multiple ways to approach something, right? And so sometimes it's kind of neat to see what other investors did because they might have approached things a little bit differently from the way that you were envisioning things, right? So I think it's always really, really cool when I see relists of properties that I didn't buy. And this particular property is very interesting to me because I almost offered on it. And I actually have an offer sheet that I drew up for the different price points I thought about trying to buy this house at. So we'll take a look at that and see how woefully ignorant I was and how the property actually did, and talk a little bit about mindset as it relates to some of these things, because I talk a lot about mindset. I know it. I'm aware of it. I hope it doesn't bother you too much, but I think it's probably the most important thing I could share with you about real estate investing is really all the technical stuff is, I don't want to say it's easy, but you can learn it. And once you learn it, you know it. Lots of people know, the true difference between an asset and a liability, but they're still broke, right? It's the mindset that actually causes you to go out and buy the assets, right? And that's why I harp on it so much. But I think that this really illustrates a mindset thing very clearly. It very clearly illustrates sort of a mindset that we should all adopt and understand when we're looking at the real estate market. So without further ado, I'm going to jump in to this particular property, and then we'll talk a little bit about the mindset. So 2 years ago, actually it was in April of 2020, so that is 22 months ago, a property went up for sale called 374 Jean d'Arc Street. I think it was a street in Sudbury, Ontario. And I'm going to pull that up for you, and I'm going to share it here on the screen in just a second. Yeah, my entire screen. Go ahead. So I'm going to show you right here. This is the actual analysis sheet that I did originally 2 years ago. 374 Jean d'Arc. You can see it's a very charming looking, kind of ugliest, kind of a dirty brown stucco house with really wide set windows, kind of oddly positioned. It was a sixplex, so it's a significant property, right? 6 units in it. They're all 5 out of 6 of them are one beds, I think, something like that. And I remember looking at this property and analyzing it and not liking that it had so many one beds, because I felt that those It was harder to add value to those, essentially. They didn't rent for as much, trying to get cash flow. And this property cash flowed. Certainly, I know Armando, if he's here yet, Armando's jumped on the call. He probably remembers this property because I definitely remember talking to him about about making an offer on this property. Anyways, we'll just run through these are the 2020 numbers. So we'll just run through them really quickly. The house was listed for $460,000, $459,900. Looked pretty good. We had a monthly cash flow, We had a monthly cash flow of about $5,000 or so per month. So the property, was producing, it was throwing off quite a bit of cash. And when we factored in all of our expenses, the $2,000 for the mortgage, it was about $3,800 in taxes or so. And then we were just estimating that insurance was going to be kind of high because it's an older property. Electricity, water, gas, property management, landscaping. You can see we had about $3,700 in expenses monthly. We were projecting out. And of course, we got our vacancy, repairs and maintenance, tenant consideration, all those things, another $600-700, right? So approximately, you're looking at, what was that? 7 and 7. So that's $4,400 or so per month in expenses and withholdings, and about $5,000 a month in income. So you can see this is a property that we thought cash flowed 2 years ago. And you can see down here, I figure you're pulling out around $600 or $700 per month out of this property in cash flow. And so our total annual cash flow for this property was projected to be about $8,000, right? Figured you might get some principal recapture too, right? So I don't know what it was. I think 2% appreciation or whatever. So we throw all that stuff together, right? Figure this property is making about I figure this property is making about $29,000 a year, right? So that's not bad, right? For sure. And especially considering we were going to put like $125,000, $130,000 in, you get $29,000, $30,000 out. It's like a 4.5 year return on investment kind of a thing, right? So that's approximately what the deal looked like. And why didn't we go with this deal? I don't know. To be honest, I don't remember. That's something that just like a real life note. You should try to keep track of those things, because now I really wish I remembered what my reasoning was for not making the offer. And I don't have anywhere where I keep track of something like that. That's just not information I've ever recorded. Where are you? 374. Sorry, I'm looking for I had it open and then I closed it for some reason. So now I gotta find it again. There we go. 374. I want the offer sheet though. Is that it? 2020. That'll be it. I think that's the one. Yes, there we go. Okay, here's the offer sheet as well. So find view and zoom in on this. So this here was a very optimistic offer, or like very aggressive offers. And also there must be another one because there were like reasonable offers too. Yeah, this one here. There we go. There we go. So here's an offer sheet. For those of you who haven't seen before, you actually have the ability to make these if you want. It's included in the REALTY analysis spreadsheet under the tab offer sheet. And all it does is it takes the numbers that you've put in for your analysis for that given property, right, for your selected property. It takes those numbers and populates these 3 boxes with them. And then you can go and play around with the details, right? The purchase price, the down payment, the interest rate, whatever you want, just to compare, right? Just to compare. That's all it's for. So for those of you who haven't seen it, I think I've shown it on the seminar a couple times before. But here, so I was just running some like A, B, C scenarios, right? If we paid $400 for it, so if we got it below ask, if we paid $450 for it, which is right around the ask, a little bit below, or if we had to, overbid for it at $500, how would we do on the property? As you can see, these are my projections. If we paid $500,000 for it, we were probably losing quite a bit of money year on year. And if we paid $400,000 for it, then we were probably going to make, quite a decent amount of money year on year. Maybe not the first year, but after that. Excuse me. So these are my projections, right? This is Jeanne d'Arc in April 2020. Now, I want to preface this before we look at what ended up happening by saying I knew a lot less about the market in Sudbury in 2020 than I do today. right? So I've learned and I've grown, and my analyses are more accurate today than they were 2 years ago. So even though this is it's actually not that bad of an analysis, like you'll see, I didn't do too terribly, but I do think that overall this analysis was perhaps a little bit too conservative. It's really hard to say because I don't know obviously what the current seller's expenses were during the carrying period. So it's hard to know if some of my more conservative assumptions, and I'm looking right at you, $3,000 a year in insurance. I'm not sure if those ended up actually being concerns for the current owner, right? And I have no way to verify that, unfortunately. But here, if I go back, do I have it? Yes, that's right. That's the one. So here's 374 Jean d'Arc Avenue from February of 2022, right? This listing was posted. I'm not sure it was actually this week. I think it was last week, but I don't. Nah, it doesn't matter. But very recently, anyways. And so this is the exact same property. You can see actually from the picture. For those of you who could see on the screen, they didn't change the stucco or the outside or anything. It still even has the ugly comrade star on the front, which, you know, I guess if you're into that, by all means, but I think it looks kind of weird. They even moved the bike. They at least moved the bike. So there's no there's no bikes in the shot anymore. But you can see it's the same property on the outside. They didn't touch it, right? It's identical. Nothing. They didn't even change the gravel. Like nothing is different. So whatever work the owner of this property for the last year and a half, 2 years has done, it's all been internal because there's nothing external. And the inside didn't actually need that much work, is what I recall, but I could be wrong. There are some things they changed. I know that for sure, right? So there are things that they did, but I don't know how much they actually ended up spending inside the place. So today, this property is listed for $574,000. Okay. So remember that this property right here, I analyzed it. It had a list price of $460,000. 2 years later, it has a list price of $574,000. So it's up $110,000 or so, right? I did the math. I figure that's about 25% price growth in just under 2 years. So 12.5% per year on average. I'll come back to that. I was going to say something about mindset, but I'll come back to it. Mindset stuff. Okay, so this is 25% price growth in 2 years. We had a rental rate in this property. My projection, at least, was about $5,000 per month. The current projection, according to the listing, is $5,500 per month. So it's seen 10% growth in rental incomes in the last 2 years. Okay. This property here, where am I? Which mouse? This mouse. There we go. So right here, if I go back, so this is now, I'm back in 2020. This is my old 2020 projection. We have here principal recapture. So $6,500 per year, right, is our mortgage principal recapture. So, excuse me, owning this property, assuming you paid around $450,000 for it, you were going to collect between $6,000 and $7,000 per year in principal recapture, mortgage pay down. All right. So when I take all of these things together, oh, I'm sorry. There was one other thing, right? Over here, also, we had our cash flow. Here, I say it was about $8,000 per year in cash flow. Now, again, that's at a $460,000 purchase price. House could have sold for more. It also could have sold for less. We don't know exactly what price the current owner paid for the property. Chances are they paid right around that price. I remember this property being on the market for a little bit. There wasn't too much excitement around it. I don't believe it got caught up in a bidding war or anything like that. So chances are they paid right around the, plus or minus a little bit, but right around there. So if I put all of those things together, I reckon, all right, that they could recapture somewhere between $12,000 and $18,000 in principal over the 2 years they've owned this property, right? depends how much, again, they're paying for the property, right? 12 would be at the lower end, like they paid 450 or so. And if they paid, let's say 500, they might be closer to that 18. They might be collecting around 8 or 9,000 a year in principal recapture. They've got cash flow. Depends how well tenanted the property was, but if you assume 100% tenancy, they made $8,000 that year. Each year that they've held the house, they probably did not have 100% tenancy, especially when you consider some of the renovations that they did. So it's probably not a fair assumption. I'd probably, bump that down to say 75% or maybe even slightly lower tenancy. But nonetheless, they should have made cash flow during the year. At 75%, they would have made $6,000 in cash flow. At 50%, they'd have made $4,000 in cash flow. But they should have made some money on the cash flow as well. And of course, that's for 2 years. So let's just go with the 100% assumption and be unfair to them. And let's say they made $8,000 in cash flow, 2 years, almost $16,000. You can see they've done really, really well on this property. In fact, if we assume that they've paid, if we assume that they paid around that $460,000, right? Then we've got $114,000 in price growth, right? To go from the 460 to the 574, right? Then we've got $8,000 a year in cash flow, right? So we'll call that $16,000. Then we have another, I'm going to go $6,500 per year. So that's $13,000 in principal recapture, right? What am I missing? Am I missing something? Passive appreciation, the principal recapture, the cash flow. No, that's it. Pardon me. If we take all of that, it's around $143,000, $150,000 per year. Sorry. In total, gross. So that's about $75,000 per year. Okay. So the person who bought this house did not immediately receive a pay increase of $75,000 per year, but essentially, as soon as they bought this house, they were making $75,000 more per year. A lot of it was going to net worth, not to cash. Just a little bit of it was cash flow, but nonetheless, this property represents approximately $75,000 per year. Now, at the time I had to analyze the property, right, you were looking at a down payment of $114,000 or so. Total cost to close, $125,000 or so. So at an average income of $75,000 a year, this property completely paid for itself, paid you back in 2 years. Essentially, the person who owns this property right now basically got back all of their money and then some. They doubled their money, essentially. Well, let's just, can I just pause there for a second and just admire the mathematics? $125,000 is a lot of money. I mean, it's no small amount of money for your down payment and your closing costs. Is recouped in 2 years. 100% return on investment in 2 years, or average of 50% return on investment per year. That is an incredible number. These are real numbers, right? Because this is the property I've got the price it was listed for. This is now the prices for the true. Maybe nobody will buy it at $574, but knowing the market, I think it's priced kind of aggressively. They might even sell for $6 something, right? So, well, I mean, we'll have to see what happens with this listing. But so far, it looks like they made 100% in 2 years, approximately, right? And I guess this is where I finally get to go off the rails and talk about mindset. They made 100% in 2 years. They made 100% in 2 years. They made 100% in 2 years. I really want to highlight that fact because this is a good deal. I'm not going to sit here and lie to you and be like, well, this is just a run-of-the-mill deal. This was a good-looking property at the time. It's why I looked into buying it, right? It was a winner for sure. Sometimes you look at a property and you're not sure if it's a winner. And maybe in time, a few years go by and somebody, knocks it out of the park on that property. And then you go, oh, yeah, that was a winner. But you didn't know. You didn't really realize up front, right? This property's not like that. You realize right away there was potential here. Nonetheless, found the property with potential. And it paid you 50% of what you put into it year on year. If your goal is financial stability, wealth generation, intergenerational wealth, leaving a financial legacy, or any of those other kind of high-flying ideas that we get into our heads about being successful, you can't afford not to be buying real estate. At 50% per year, you can't afford not to be. I defy you to show me the thing where you could put your money into it with almost no risk and get a 50% return, right? Because there is almost no risk with this investment. You have insurance if it burns down or lightning strikes it, right? And otherwise, like, could this house lose money? Of course it could, right? I'm not here to tell you there's no risk, but it wasn't likely to lose very much. It certainly wasn't going to zero, right? And so that's something that we need to be very cognizant of. You're taking a very minor risk, almost no risk at all, and basically getting a 50% return on investment. I know what you're saying, of course. Aaron, this deal is a deal. It's great. What if I buy a piece of crap, right? What if my deal's not going to be knock it out of the park like this, right? Well, sure, maybe your deal isn't as good as this one, right? This is where the mindset comes into it, right? Is I want you to look at this deal. I want you to understand that, first of all, this is a deal that I said no to, right? At the end of the day, we did not go forward with this property, obviously, right? And it's a clear winner, right? So this is one of the properties that I said no to, right? So as long as you are a little bit discerning, you may end up saying no to properties like this too, which means what are you saying yes to? Hopefully some really amazing deals, right? The fact of the matter is that real estate travels in one direction when you're buying it correctly, right? Real estate can move in multiple directions if you're buying it wrongly, right? Like people who got burned in Florida 10 years ago, the people who are about to get burned in the GTA in the next couple of years, right? Like you can definitely buy things at the wrong time in the wrong place and spend too much money on them. There is no question about that, right? But if you are employing the principles, right, doing the analysis, looking for cash flow, understanding your four streams, right, and really looking at every single property as, you know, a business or as a self-contained asset, and understanding where the cash flows in and where the cash is going to flow out, you almost cannot lose, except if you don't play the game, right? You almost cannot lose at this real estate thing, except if you don't participate. I'll show you how you're a loser, because I know every single one of you is a loser. Right now, I know that that's a fact because none of you own this property. I'm a loser too. None of us owns this property. We did not get the 100% over the last 2 years on this property. Now, fortunately and hopefully, you all have other properties. I have other properties. You can only win so much. LeBron James can, he can win the Larry O.B. multiple times, right? But he's never going to win the Vince Lombardi that they're playing for this afternoon, right? So, you can only win what you can win. You don't get to participate in every game. But what you need to understand is you need to be participating, right? And not just you need to be participating like, oh, that's nice. One day when I've saved up enough money, one day when I'm ready, one day when I've learned enough, one day when I've attended my 1,000th seminar on investing, can I get started? No, you needed to start yesterday. Right? If you have $0 to your name, you need to go figure out how to make that negative $150,000. Right? If you have $150,000 in your name, you need to figure out how to make that zero. Right? You need to figure out how to go, and really it's not that hard to figure out. You just need to talk to people, really, how to go and get some debt. There's a lot of debt in life that is bad debt. People are going to try and sell you cars. They're going to try and sell you credit cards. They're going to try and sell you vacations. They're going to try and sell you friggin' weird timeshare, rental, swap, blah, blah, blah. I don't know. People sell weird stuff all the time. They want you to finance your computer now. I was on Amazon the other day. I financed a Kindle, one of those little e-readers. It's insane, the things that you can finance. All bad debt. Well, the e-reader is at 0%, and I could pay for it. So I financed it because you can give me free money, then I'll take it. But in general, right, these are not good things to garner debt on, right? And if I had to check my credit to get that stupid Kindle, I would not have done it. But Amazon will just finance me for free because they got money like that, I guess. But those are things that you collect bad debt on. These are good debts. And good debts, in some cases, that are so good that it is worth going all the way into the hole for them. Right? Again, if you have a $0 net worth, become negative 150. It will get you ahead. Pardon me. Excuse me. If you had started with a $0 net worth, you were worth nothing, and you somehow convinced somebody to lend you $125,873.50. And I'm not sitting here trying to tell you that it's going to be easy to do. I'm only saying if you manage to do it, and it is possible, even if it's not easy, you could have bought this house. And if you'd bought this house, you'd have made somewhere on the order of $150,000 over the last 2 years. And so your net worth today would be approximately $150,000 less whatever the cost of borrowing that money was, because that's the only thing that wouldn't be factored in here, right? And actually, if you could get it at a standard mortgage rate, that is even factored into the analysis. I'm pointing at it, sorry. That's even factored into the analysis. Obviously, if you have zero net worth, you're probably not in a position to get such good mortgage terms, but you never know until you try. I know somebody who just bought a condominium, and I don't know the details. I actually haven't had a chance to talk to them yet, but they don't work. Like they have some good connections to people, including a mortgage broker who will definitely have their back, but they don't have like a steady source of income. They would have a good job if they would just work it, but they literally don't. And yet they qualified for a mortgage, right? So it is possible to qualify for a mortgage when you're unemployed. It is possible to qualify for a mortgage when you don't make very much money. It's not necessarily easy, and it won't necessarily be the favorable mortgage, but it is absolutely doable. I think I look around the world and I see the way people are behaving, or I look in our own dear country at the moment, and I'm always a little bit confused by the behavior of people. always a little bit confused. I'll tell you one thing that doesn't confuse me about people. We're pretty lazy by and large. I know I am. You know, who the hell wants to do a bunch of work that they don't need to do if they can avoid it somehow, right? Or if they can pawn it off on somebody else or what have you. Get laziness. I understand it completely. As do businesses. Businesses very much understand laziness. They understand that you'll pay an extra dollar for convenience, right? Or the movie theater understands that when they sell you the marked up seats for the digital D-box or whatever, that they can then charge you for the privilege of selecting your seats before you get to the movie theater, things like that, right? Convenience, or charge you extra to bring you food at your seats in the VIP theater, or Wonderland, for example, can charge you for the Fast Pass, or Disneyland, or wherever, right? So businesses understand that convenience is something that can be leveraged. We as individuals and as investors and as people trying to make ourselves the best we can also need to understand that laziness is a real factor in all of our lives, and it's something that can be leveraged, right? One of the reasons why there aren't as many wealthy, successful investors in the world as I believe there ought to be, it's because people are lazy. Fact of the matter is that if you have a good T4 job and you go to the bank and you fit squarely within the box, then they will pretty quickly and pretty easily qualify you for a mortgage and give you a mortgage product and send you out on your way with a loan. And the process is relatively easy, fairly frictionless, and fairly quick. The reality is that a bank is in the business of giving out loans, and so they cannot just sit there and only take the low-hanging fruit. They are willing to work to find the, slightly more out of reach fruit, so to speak, right? The unfortunate truth, though, is that if you're one of those people who maybe isn't the low-hanging fruit, you don't fit nicely into that T4 box, your income source is not quite as steady or obvious, or insert problem here, debt to service ratio, whatever. There's a lot of different reasons why you might not be the most favorable candidate for a loan. Well, laziness immediately becomes a factor, because you, me, pretty much everybody I've ever known and ever met don't really want to jump through all those extra hoops. We look at the person who has that nice T4, perfect credit score, fits exactly within the box, and they walk into the bank, shake hands with John, the bank manager, and walk out with a mortgage or a mortgage commitment. And you say, hey, that looks good. I want it to be that easy. I shouldn't have to fight with my lender for a month and a half or 2 months in order to get them to lend to me. And the reality is that maybe you shouldn't. I don't know. Shouldn't. Those are very dangerous words because they don't usually mean anything. What I can tell you is if you do the fighting and you get the damn loan, it might be worth $75,000 to $100,000 a year to you. Right? I think a lot of people say they want things, myself included, that they don't really want. You know, I'd like a Ferrari. I'm sure a lot of you can relate. They're pretty sweet cars. I mean, there's a lot of nice cars, but just use a Ferrari as an example. I'd like a Ferrari. Now, I don't give up my weekends and keep working so I can save up the money for a Ferrari, right? That's not something that I do, right? I even on Saturday, I'll tell you, I sleep in a little bit, I'm not giving that up for the Ferrari. There's probably a lot of things in my life I could change to bring a Ferrari closer nearer to my reach, right? But I don't do those things because when I say that I want a Ferrari, I mean it'd be cool. I don't mean I want a Ferrari, right? Now, the other day, I felt like some chips, just potato chips, bag of Lay's, and I wanted those damn chips. Tell you what, I got in my car and I drove to the store and I bought me some chips. And I know what you're going to tell me. My $3 bag of chips cannot be compared to a $500,000 Ferrari. And certainly the effort that is required to satisfy the one desire compared to the other is not the same. No, that's true, right? But what I'm pointing out is that when you want something, you actually want something, you take the action, whatever it is, to get it. In this case, my bag of chips. I mean, it's a lot of effort to get into a car in the cold and drive to a store and pick up the bag of chips. It's a lot of effort when you really think about it. And yet I was willing to make that effort because I really wanted the damn bag of chips, right? Now, it would also be a lot of effort for me to work on the weekends and whatever else I would have to do to eventually get a Ferrari. But I don't do those things because I'm not serious about it, right? So we all need to spend some time, I guess, getting right with ourselves, really checking in with who you are and what you want to be and where you want to go. What do I want? If it's material success in terms of wealth, investing, finance, that sort of thing, it's in front of you on the screen right now. Joan of Arc, right there. A relatively middling deal, not particularly impressive. Whoever bought it walked away with a cool $150,000 in their pocket, probably, maybe more. Again, excuse me, I would not be surprised if this thing sold for $625, right? Which would be another $50,000 on top of their 150 or so take, right? So there's a lot of financial success that's available to you if you're willing to take the action, right? And there are varying levels of effort. The person who balloons their wealth, like I don't know, pick one of these guys, Grant Cardone, right? That guy is putting in a level of effort commensurate to the 2,500 rental units or whatever it is he's at now, right? To get there, you don't need to put in that effort level. I mean, for him, it's a full-time job, 7 days a week, 365 a year, to try to basically promote himself and acquire more properties, basically. And I mean, he does other things too. He has the whole business with the training and the sales and all that. So he's working his butt off to, have a fleet of Ferraris, I guess, right? And you don't need to do that. Your desire level maybe to have one Ferrari, or maybe just to have, $1 million in the bank or whatever, right? We don't all need to be aiming at Warren Buffett and Elon Musk. But if you have an aim, and I don't see how you couldn't, because if you're a young person, even if you're a middle-aged person, even if you're starting to be an older person who's thinking about, what their later years are going to be like, money is going to be a big factor in all of that. Money is going to give you the freedom. You know what? I'm going to pause that thought right there. I'm going to pivot hard. I've been listening to Grant Cardone's book, and obviously I listen to a lot of books, and I've always avoided Grant Cardone's stuff because for I'm pretty sure you're probably all familiar with Grant Cardone, but if you're not, right, he's kind of that brash Southern salesy guy, real estate investor, and talks about success and 10x and 100x and whatever. He's a bit much. I've always kind of avoided him because he I don't know, just because he has that persona, and I've always liked what he has to say, but I've never like read his books or anything, because I've always felt like, I don't know, he always felt like too much to me. But anyways, he said something in his book that relates to what I was just saying, and I want to share it with you because I think it is so true. I was just about to say that money and finances are going to determine, your freedom and your options in your life. And I mean, not in every extent and not in every way, but in a lot of important and fundamental ways, right? And Grant Cardone says something in his book, and I've struggled to come with an argument against it. And he talks about success. And in his eyes, or at least in the pages of his book, success is not something that you are lucky to achieve, or something that you should be glad for if it falls into your lap. In his mind, or again, in the pages of his book, success is your duty. It's your job. It's your responsibility. And, I look at the world today, and I'm watching these truckers protest in Ottawa, and the people in Ottawa freaking out about the protests and the blah, 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 whatever. The happenings of the world, right? And people in China being pulled off screen for criticizing Chinese presidents and stuff like that, right? Just watching the world. And it occurs to me that Grant Cardone is 100% correct. And he's 100% correct because of this. Your financial health will enable you many, many, many things. Whether it is fancy trips or fancy cars, or regular trips and regular cars, or no trip at all, but a nice house to live in and the security of knowing no one's going to take it from you. That's what your financial success is going to do for you. The other thing that your financial success is going to do for you, and I think it's a very important thing. When I look around the world, I think it's one of the things that's absolutely lacking, and one of the biggest problems that we have. People talk about FU money, right? The idea is I'm going to win the lottery, I'm going to have $50 million, and then my boss is going to come to me one day and ask me to do something stupid, and I'm going to say, F you, because I've got money. I don't need this job, and I will leave because you're asking too much of me, right? I love the concept of FU money. I think people, by and large, will eventually push other people too far, and at that point they need to get an FU. It's the truth. That being said, most people will never be in a position in their life to ever say FU because they don't have FU money. That's why we call it FU money. It's a dream or a fantasy for most people. And I think that FU money is not a dream or a fantasy. I think it's a necessity. Me personally, just my opinion. But I don't see how you can stand up as a man, and perhaps, for the women listening, maybe for you this isn't a problem, but for the men listening, I don't see how you can stand up as a man and be in a position where someone else is going to tell you what you can and cannot do with your life, or they will take everything away from you. You failed as a man if you're in that position, and lots of men have. Don't feel bad if you're in the vast majority of people up until this point, or perhaps into the foreseeable future, right? But really, if you find yourself in this is going to dangle a carrot in front of you and you're too hungry to ignore them, that's your own failure, right? That's you not having taken care of your responsibilities to the point where you can say, screw you and your carrot, right? And I think we see a lot of that today. I think we're seeing a lot of people who are being put into situations that they do not feel comfortable with, right? I'm not necessarily talking about vaccine mandates or anything like that. I just mean in general. Jobs and life are putting people in the situations that they would say no to, but they don't feel that they have a choice. And the reason they don't feel that they have a choice is because they're financially living on a razor's edge. When you are 6 weeks away from bankruptcy, it is really, really hard to argue with your employer about whatever dumb thing they're asking you to do. Right? When you're 6 years away from insolvency, you tell your employer to go get F tomorrow just for asking you to grab them a coffee. Because you don't care about them as a source of income. You got 6 years figured out before you're going to need to go back to somebody and earn a living again, quote unquote, right? I hope that it is very clear to you. I hope your eyes are wide open. Again, this is a property. Could have been picked at random, but it wasn't. It's a property I looked at 2 years ago. I thought about offering on. Here's my offer sheet. Look at this. This is my insultingly low offer sheet because this property had sat on the market, and I was like, let's just lowball the crap out of this thing. And so there, the screen just changed. For those of you who can see, here's the lowball offer sheet. I mean, I was considering, I don't think seriously, but at least just to see what the numbers look like, $300,000 on a property that was listed at $460,000. So I ran through the numbers: pay high, pay low, pay in the middle, do it all. And again, it just didn't work out. And I mean, I bought other houses that year, right? So it just wasn't this deal just wasn't the deal for me at the time, right? And so now to see it 2 years later, or 22 months later, nothing's changed on the outside. Right? Again, the pictures they're almost identical. It's funny. And yet to see that the person who owns this property probably made $150,000 or more. Now, yes, I am ignoring taxes and other expenses. At the end of the day, their $150,000 over 2 years will probably end up only being closer to $100,000 in their pocket, right? Because Justin Trudeau, he's got to steal whatever portion of the money, right? That's how the government works. But nonetheless, right? Okay, so $100,000 per year, $50,000 a year, right? That's like an average Canadian's job for a full year. Average Canadian's job for a full year. All you had to do was buy this property. I mean, well, it's not all you had to do. You also had to take on the mental burden of worrying about the property and knowing that you've got people living in there and, watching the rise of weird social commie, whatever is going on in their country, and wonder if that's going to affect your investment in the future and things like that. But by and large, you pay a very small price to own this property. And it pays you a very, very large return year on year. And, I've said this multiple times on here, but I'll reiterate because it's just so important. It's very easy to listen to bigger pockets or watch Matt McKeever or read Robert Kiyosaki or some of these other, whatever you want to call them, guru, thought leader, whatever, inspirational figures. It's very easy to look at what they've done. Robert Kiyosaki's got like 5,500 rental units or something like that, and to sit there and just say, I can't do that. I'm not going to own 5,500 rental units. I wouldn't even know where to begin getting started. And it's true. You know what? Chances are I'm not talking to the next Robert Kiyosaki, and that's okay. That's okay. You don't need to be the next Robert Kiyosaki, because if you buy one unit per year for the next 20 years, you'll be a 20-unit owner. And you'll probably make over $3,000 a month off of those units in today's dollars, which might be more because of inflation in the future, but approximately. And you'll have a good, comfortable, decent life. And actually, if you just do that one property a year, I guarantee you'll be a multi-millionaire in 20 years, right? Like, it guaranteed, no question about it, right? And so I think for a lot of us, myself included, like, I'm not immune to this. Although I am getting I've gotten a lot better over the years, and I am still improving. But the mindset, go out there and take action. What are you afraid of? What are you worried about? You're worried you're going to lose money? You're not going to lose money. You're losing money by not doing anything. That's how you're losing money. I tell you that right now, right? Can you make a mistake that costs you money? Real talk. Yes, you can. You can easily make a mistake that costs you $50,000. Like, I'm not trying to sit here and act like you can't. What I am trying to convince you of is that the biggest mistake you could make would be to sit there and not try, because these things are making more than $50,000 a year. And I want to point out to you that if you go buy one and you just do on average half as well as this property did, right? So again, this property made between $75,000 and $100,000 a year. That's approximately. So if you do half of that, you make like $35,000 a year on the properties that you buy. Okay, so 1 year you lose, $25,000, $50,000, but you make $35,000 every other year. Basically, what you're saying is that you're worried about a 2-year setback in a 20-year plan, and that's stopping you from getting started. Like, it's a very silly. It's not only is it a silly thought process, but if you really dive deep into that, right? If this property is paying $50,000, $75,000, maybe even $100,000 a year, if that's what it's paying, and let's just go 50 at the low end, $50,000. And these are not up-to-date numbers because I don't check, because I actually don't care. But the Canadian average income, single earner income, used to be, so maybe it's changed, $40,000 a year. Let's say it has changed. Let's say it's grown by 20% over the last whatever many years since I was aware of this statistic. Okay, so that's $50,000 a year. You know what that means is that if you buy this house, and it performs at the lower end of the performance scale, right? Because somewhere between 50 and 100,000, it's probably right around that $75,000 mark, but it's somewhere in there depending on where this thing sells. That this house is earning per year. It is as if, and forgive me, this is kind of offensive language to people who are stupid, but it is as if you bought yourself a slave, a nice little Canadian slave who's going to work $50,000 a year and give it all to you. Great part is you don't need to beat them. You don't need to whoop them. You don't need to violate anybody's rights to do it. In fact, you get to sleep well at night knowing that there are some people out there who perhaps are not as well off as you, perhaps not as well educated as you, perhaps not as knowledgeable about the world as you, who have a roof over their head to sleep under in exchange for $1,000 or $1,500 of rent that month, right? That they would not have if someone like you was not willing to dole out the $100,000 to buy the place and be qualified and competent enough to get a mortgage from the bank, right, to pay for the rest of it, right? You have to appreciate and understand that in the world, there are a lot of people. I don't want to say that they're stupid, but not everybody is up to scratch. And you all know what I mean. I mean, let's not even mince words. I have a cousin. He has Down syndrome. It's very nice. I was going to call him a young man, but he's 50-something years old, so he's quite a bit more senior than I am. But I think of him as a young man because, you know, he functions at the level of whatever, a 10-year-old, 8-year-old, 12-year-old, something like that. And he's amazing, full of love and joy, and there's a lot you can learn from him, right? But he's never going to be a real estate investor. He's never going to be a salary earner. I mean, Zellers used to pay him to greet people a couple dollars an hour, but the government decided that, you know, he had to get minimum wage and he's not worth $15 an hour. So now he doesn't get to work at all, which is unfortunate because he really liked that job and he didn't actually care how much he was getting paid. And now instead he gets a check from the government and he has to find things to do. But that's a whole separate thing. There are people like that in the world. Now, my cousin is obvious because you can see him coming with the Down syndrome. But there are lots of people who they look normal, but they're just not very functional people, right? Whether they're very disorganized, they're scatterbrained. Obviously, people, you know, entangle themselves with drugs and, you know, not everything is marijuana. You know, if you decide you're going to take up some marijuana, you know, you get a little hungry, a little sleepy, whatever, your life goes on. But you know, some people, they get hooked on you know, stuff like crack and heroin. And I mean, I don't know anything about those drugs, but if they're anything like what they tell me, then they mess your life up, right? And meth and that sort of thing, and fentanyl, right? That kind of stuff. And those people, you know what? Sometimes they've messed their life up to a point where, you know, buying a house is a pipe dream. It might be something that will never happen, right? And yet you can step in being blessed with the knowledge and the wherewithal that you have and the discipline and the ability to save and all of those things that you have that perhaps, you know, some of these people I'm talking about don't have. You can step in and you can use that to buy them a home and shelter them. And in exchange, you get paid. You get paid very, very well, in fact, right? And so that's something you really need to understand is like you're going out into the world and you're helping. You're actually doing a lot to help. Because again, you know, you even just think about the scenario, right? Let's just say we got some guy, he earns $1,500 a month. I don't know what $1,500 a month is. It's not very much money. Times 12 months, that's $18,000 a year, right? So he is well within Canada, and it's a silly line, but we call it the poverty line. He's below the poverty line, right? He can afford $1,000 a month for rent. He needs that other $500 for food and clothes and whatever else. But he can afford $1,000 a month for rent. That guy's not qualifying for a mortgage. There's no chance. He doesn't earn enough money for starters. And let's just say that $18,000 a year is sporadic. He might work 2 or 3 different jobs to get that money. It's not always consistent, right? No bank is lending him money. The bank has somebody's money, they have to make sure they get it back. They can't just lend it all willy-nilly. It's not a charity. They can't just give it to this guy on the hope that he'll pay them back. The guy has not demonstrated that he's able to pay them back, so he's not going to be lent the money. He obviously can't afford, he can neither afford a down payment, right? Saving, let's even say that he paid his $1,000 of rent and he saved all $500. He lives off of air. He's still not saving up a down payment for, 10, 15 years. So he can't buy a house, just a down payment, much less cash, and nobody's going to lend him any money. And yet, he can sign on the dotted line with you as your tenant to pay you the $1,000, and he can immediately gain access to the $4, $5, $6, $7 million asset, whatever it is, property that you spent your hard-earned money on, right? That you were able to qualify at the bank for. And so, in the price of admission, $1,000 to gain access to your $400,000, $500,000 property, it's a really good deal. And he gets to come in from the cold and have a comfortable place to keep his things and stay safe. And you, of course, get the rent, right? I know I might sound kind of cheesy, but I really don't think that there are very many things you can do in life that are better than that. It's a funny thing, I think a lot of people who don't know anything about investing, they probably look at investors and think that they're a selfish group of people. And as somebody who both knows what investing is and knows quite a few investors, I almost couldn't help but think that it's the opposite. Investors are some of the least selfish people. Most people, they go to work every single day or whatever, 5 days a week, and they get their paycheck, and they immediately think of how they can spend that money on themselves. Can I buy a new car, new clothes, new shoes, go out, dinner, dancing, buy a nice bottle of scotch, whatever. And maybe at the end of the week, if there's a little bit of money left over, they'll walk past a homeless man, or they'll send some money to charity, or they'll donate to the Ronald McDonald Foundation while they're buying their $36 mega meal, right? And they consider themselves to be generous people. They think that they're charitable and good and giving. And a lot of those same people who've given the pennies that are left over after they've indulged themselves all week or all month long will turn around and look at somebody like a real estate investor and say that they're greedy, they're terrible, they're takers. What does the real estate investor do? He or she saves their money. They work hard and diligently. They try to protect their credit probably, right? And they take that money and they don't spend it on themselves. They save it. And when they've saved up enough of it, they go to the bank or a lender and they say, how much will you give me in addition to my money? Let me go out and buy something. And they go buy something, not for themselves, not something for their own self-aggrandizement, not something that makes them look better or feel better or more comfortable. Really, they buy something that's going to do nothing for them, perhaps even cause them stress, certainly for the first year or two, right? But they go out and they buy something that they can make a home for somebody else. And if they're a good real estate investor, they actually go out and buy something that nobody really wants to live in. And then they go spend more of their time and more of their money to make that thing desirable, right? To make it a place where people do want to live and they do wish to call home, right? And then what do? They give it to the people, usually for very little money, right? $1,000 here, $1,500 there, whatever. Like whatever the amount is, when you compare it to the value of the thing, it's a very small amount, right? That's what they do. That's what an investor is, right? And that's true of all things, right? Shoot, if you go take your money and you're an investor and you go invest in, I don't know, say you invest in Tesla, right? Well, what did you do? You took your hard-earned money and you gave it to Elon Musk and you said, hey, Elon, figure out how to make more cars for cheaper so more people can have them, right? And maybe if you work that all out and it works out well, then in the future, yeah, I'll take my cut then, right? But today I'm willing to sacrifice to make sure that other people can have. That's what investing is. I mean, that's all. That's really and truly all that it is, right? And so I hope you really take the time, to work on your mindset. Ask yourself, why do I want to do this? What is in it for me? Why is this my goal? And then to really understand that if this is something that you are serious about, and I have no doubt that every single one of you listening to me is serious about real estate investing at one level or another, right? Then understand that you can't afford not to take action, right? And you can't afford not to take action for such a wide variety of reasons. Why? Because it's a good thing to do. Why? Because it's almost impossible to lose out when you do take action. Why? Because the losers are the people who are sitting on the sideline, right? Why? Because the opportunities are immense, right? You gotta go out there and get it done. So, like I said, I love to see these relistings. It shows you that there are other investors out there in the market taking action. And, you know, for the last 2 years, it's been hard to remember that. Not seeing anybody, not going anywhere, no associations are open or anything like that. When I first started doing these seminars or whatever, it originally didn't quite start out as a seminar. It was more of a planned lesson thing. You know, the original plan was to eventually have in-person meetups. You know, allow people to get to know each other and meet and greet and sit down and talk real estate and whatever. And that was, of course, the beginning of the lockdown, 2020. And I didn't expect that 2 years later. Well, that's a lie, actually. I did expect. Most people didn't, I think. But I actually did expect. I remember when this all started saying, I don't think this is a good idea. And I don't think once we introduce restrictions that they'll go away. I remember thinking that. But anyways, it's still kind of surreal that 2 years later we're still dealing with all of this. And it's really unfortunate because, you know, it obviously hasn't been possible to, or at least it hasn't been advisable to have a get together or a meet and greet. And that is really, really unfortunate. And it's a shame because, you know, you can go out into the world, at least back when the world was normal, and you could go to the different REITs, right, in Mississauga and Toronto and Sudbury, and you could meet the real estate investors and see that, you know, I don't think anybody thinks what I'm saying is BS, but to really see that, like, it's not BS, that real estate investors are the people who are sacrificing to try and make our society better. And yes, they're rewarded for it. There's not a question about that. But shouldn't they be? And also, like, what is it to be rewarded for doing the right thing when anybody can do the right thing, right? Like, everybody would get the reward of investing if they just did. It's just that most people don't because they don't want to, right? They'd rather spend the money on themselves, and understandably, right? Completely. I mean, I think we all understand spending money on yourself, right? But if you take some time and you pause and you provide for other people first, eventually it comes back for you, right? And I mean, that's the world's simplest principle. I think we all do understand it on some level, but we've also allowed our world and our society to become so complicated, and we've allowed language especially to be used and abused and warped to such a point where it's not always clear what is the good, sound, right thing and what is not. Yeah. So, thank you for your time. I'm not gonna harp on. It's 11 a.m. and so I'm like right on time for once, right on schedule for once. I want to thank you so much for again spending your Sunday morning with me. I hope I've said something here that really reached you or resonated with you, and hopefully will make you think about things differently, or you know, take action or what have you. Yeah. If you have any questions or comments, now's a great time. And if not, yes, Dylan, go ahead.
Earlier in the seminar, you mentioned the GTA buyers coming for a headache. What do you mean by that? Like they're about to get burned?
Well, it's a pretty throwaway statement, so don't read too much into it. But all I meant was, when you look at the real estate market, right, people get burned, right? That's something that happens, right? And I was just trying to point out, like, people get burned. I'm saying flippantly, sort of, that you're going to make money no matter what you do, which is mostly true, except if you do the really, really stupid stuff. So the people in Toronto who are going to get burned there's some proportion of people. I'm not sure who they are or when they will get burned exactly. But essentially, if you're paying, let's say, $1.8 million for a property, right? And you can't rent it for more than $3,500. So you're something like $2,000, $3,000, maybe $4,000 underwater at the end of every month on this property, right? Then you have a massive problem when interest rates turn against you, right? Because when interest rates turn against you, right, it's going to drop the price that people are going to pay for the house, which means now nobody's going to be able to pay you $1.8 million for it. And as soon as they can't pay you $1.8 million for it, and you're underwater $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 per month, those are the people who are going to get burned. So there's some proportion of Toronto buyers right now who have bought purely on speculation. They've been very incautious, right? They haven't analyzed or understood anything. They didn't at least look for properties where the cash flow was kind of close enough that they'd be able to carry it in an emergency. They're just blind speculators, essentially. Those people are going to get burned. And why are they going to get burned? Interest rates are going to increase, and they may not increase massively, but if if interest rates go up 1%, right, then how many people were at like the very edge of their CMHC allowable purchase price at $1.5 million, right? Because that was the maximum that CMHC would insure. How many of those people now, you increase the interest by 1%, no longer qualify, can no longer jump over the stress test, right? If interest rates go up by 2%, how many of those people? 3%, right? Like, would it be unheard of to have interest rates go from like 1.5 or 2% right now to, let's say, 4%? No, that seems reasonable. Like, that would not be a strong interest rate environment, right? That would still be a relatively low interest rate. Yet it seems like a pretty reasonable outcome. And yet if interest rates go from their current like 2% to 4%, they've doubled. You've effectively doubled the monthly cost of a mortgage, which means you've essentially halved the number of people who can afford to buy your property. And those people who are at the very top end of the speculation, they're likely to get burned, unless, of course, if interest rates don't rise, right? And I think that's one of the really neat things about investing, right? Is we're all making our bets on the future, and there is no clear path, right? Maybe, Dylan, you see that future differently, and you think that the people in Toronto won't get burned because maybe you think you agree, yeah, of course, maybe a crash is inevitable one day, but maybe it's 10 years from now and there's lots of time to still make money, right? Could be, right? I don't know what the timeline is for that crash, but I do think that those people at the top of the speculation in Toronto are going to get burned to some extent. To be fair, Canadian banks are pretty discriminating, so it won't be like the 2007 crash in the States where they had just been giving out subprime mortgages to people who should not have been given mortgages. Here, at least the people in Toronto who are being given mortgages should theoretically be able to service those mortgages, so we should see much fewer foreclosures. But again, I mean, just imagine yourself in that situation where you bought a property and it's now costing you $2,500 a month, right? Like, we're talking about $30,000 a year. Let's say you have a good income. Let's say you make $100,000 a year. The government takes $30,000 or so out for taxes. You're left with about $60,000 per year, right? And now you have to put 30 of it into servicing this house that you don't live in, that's not doing anything for you. That's actually worth less than what you paid for it, right? Like, that's not a long term. So those people, they get burned, right? Because either something has to give, and either they eat that $30,000 for a couple of years until they can sell the property at like a break even, or they cut their losses and say, shoot, I have to lose $250,000 on this property because it's squeezing my lifestyle too much to spend this $30,000 supporting the property, right? And that's a beautiful thing, right? Is for everybody who is investing wisely in markets and investing, right, seeking out cash flow and the opportunity to get ahead. For those people, when this time comes, those houses are going to have to sell for a discount. And you should be in a position to maybe pick one or two of them up for a much more reasonable price than the person who's selling it for did, right? And so in that way, you're again helping, because you're helping to save this person from their really bad decisions, right? Instead of having to go to zero, they just have to lose some of the money, right? And conversely, you're also helping because you keep that rental stock on the market. Whereas, the person who lost money on it, they might remove that rental stock from the market, right? Maybe it could be more profitable for them to convert it into a single family home and sell it right? Or whatever, right? You don't know how that investment might play out, right? Similarly, like even just looking at this Joan of Arc, I was looking at it as a buy and hold. That's how my analyses had this property. And as a buy and hold, this property made money, but not like an amazing amount of money. But obviously the person who bought it, they kind of treated it more like a flip. A slow, long flip, true, but more like a flip, right? Yeah, go ahead, Sean.
Thanks, Aaron. For this particular property, commercial financing, because it's 5 and up.
So for this property, you could pursue commercial financing. The Royal Bank of Canada and I don't remember the other one, but there is another bank will lend to you on this property as a residential. They will treat 6 and under as a residential. Everybody else will treat this as a commercial. So it's really, really up to you how you'd want to qualify for it. Understanding that if your goal is to refinance, and I actually learned this the hard way, if your goal is to refinance, you probably want this to be commercial because then you'll have more lenders to market it to for the refinancing. Whereas obviously if you get a loan from RBC and there's only one other bank, then refinancing might be kind of tricky. If they both say no, you're kind of stuck. But you could definitely buy this as a residential if you wanted to. You pay the slightly lower down payment, and that's really the only advantage is paying the slightly lower down payment. One thing that is neat about properties like these kind of edge case where it could be commercial, could be residential, it's like you're able to play around with the valuation, right? You can say it's a commercial property and you can value it as such, or you could turn around and say it's a residential property and you can value it as such, and you'd be justified in doing both. And some investors do that, right? Like some people might look at this property as a residential. They might buy it as a residential. They might treat it as a residential, then put the work into raising the rents, and then they might value it as a commercial, say, oh, well, I've increased the value by increasing the NOI, right, by increasing the rents. And so now the property, whatever I paid, let's say 500, because that's what it was worth as a residential, but now it's a cash flowing property that's throwing off the equivalent of, I don't know, $70,000 a year or whatever. So now I want $700,000 for it. Right? There are investors who do that. They will buy it one way and then they'll turn around and sell it another way, right? Because again, you as the investor, you're defining the use of this thing, right? It's your job as the owner of the property to find the highest and best use, to quote realtor parlance, right? So if you buy this property, or if you see this property as a residential and you determine during the time that you own it that it would actually be more advantageous to you or to the community for this to be considered a commercial property, by all means, go ahead, right? Not only that, of course, but you could buy a property that is squarely residential, right? Of course, you could also buy like a 3-plex, which there's no debate about that, right? Or maybe it's a 3-plex on lots of land. You always go back to the city and get it rezoned into a commercial 8-plex, for example, right? So those definitions are flexible, right? But yeah, to answer your base question, 6 units and up is usually considered a commercial mortgage, except in the case of RBC and that one other lender who would consider it residential. Yeah, so there you go. Any other questions? Okay, well, again, I hope you guys have a wonderful weekend. And if you think of something, you didn't think of now, please send me an email or give me a phone call, whatever. I'm happy to try and help. And really and truly, take the opportunity, go out there and buy stuff. The market will reward forget the market. Life rewards action. I don't think that's a controversial statement, so take some. Thank you and have a great weekend.